I don't feel like reading right now, so we're gonna do this segment next because I got to read like a whole article for my next segment. So we're gonna do this. So apparently somebody asked Matt Walsh about his past comments on Minecraft and the mining of Minecraft. Okay. So let's see what we got here. It's a short one. Let's hear it, Matt Walsh. Set the record straight.
Mr. Walsh, it's nice to see you. I've watched a lot of your content.
Appreciate it.
No problem.
No problem, brother.
I wanted to ask the question. You said before, virtually every culture has its own child into adult initiation. Almost all of them before the age of 18.
Sure. Probably.
And not only that, 16-year-old girls are mature enough to make their own decisions and even get pregnant and start families as well. And you even said 13-year-olds, if expected in society to act like 23-year-olds, that's what you'll get.
A lot of information to parse through. Well, I guess all right. I got to go through this like piece by piece.
Girls are mature enough to make their own decisions before the age of 18. Child into adult.
Okay. I want to do these piece by piece. Hold on.
You said before, virtually every culture has its own child into adult initiation.
It does. Pretty much every culture. I just have to post something real quick. It's gonna be easy. Every culture does have a child to adult initiation that is before 18. You know, some people have the quinceañera. I believe in the Jewish tradition, young boys are men when they're like 13. Absolutely, that does exist. That doesn't mean that it's right. There is also another point, and we'll touch on it again when it comes up, that he made is like if you treat 13-year-olds like 22-year-olds, they'll act like them. I disagree, and I hate giving Matt Walsh any credit to what he's saying, but then I also kind of agree. A little bit. And the only reason I say that is because we do have a problem in the West, and I love the West. Like I love Western culture, but of people growing up slower. People are not able to move out as much because they can't afford housing. There's less housing available. Those houses are shit, and it does put a block on your maturity. Obviously, if you are confronted with things at an earlier age that are more mature, and I'm not talking about sex, I'm talking about working, things of that nature, living on your own. You will generally adjust to that, and you will be generally better off. So that part is definitely true. 1,000%. That being said, I wouldn't say like a 13-year-old would have the maturity level of a 22-year-old just because you go with that route. Yeah, if you learn things when you're younger, you will be more mature, but you still don't finish developing until you're like 25. So while I don't think it's a bad idea to necessarily put more responsibilities onto young people, like for instance, I started working when I was like 12 years old. Reasonably, you don't have to go too crazy, but I think that we probably don't give kids enough credit for what they can handle, whether it is like some work or some forms of education, like comprehensive sexual health education, which focuses heavily on consent, especially at that age. As adults, we're very worried about our kids and protecting them, and so we don't let them kind of experience the world, and I think that's reducing their maturity. We should be doing that more, but it doesn't mean that a 12-year-old will be able to be ready for something that a 22-year-old is ready for. Back then, people would pass away like when they were like 30. So, of course, you're going to have like a 12-year-old get married. It doesn't mean that it's right, and it's dangerous, and having a baby at that age is very dangerous, and that would come with the conversation around this topic. It's like you don't want 12-year-olds getting pregnant. It could hurt them significantly. So just because, yes, when you're younger and you have more responsibility thrust upon you, it will mature you more. That doesn't mean that it will make you as much like super mature or a lot more mature. You're still limited in your ability and capacity to consent to certain things. So just being clear to that.
Almost all of them before the age of 18. And not only that, 16-year-old girls are mature enough to make their own decisions and even get pregnant.
I don't think so. I disagree with adults. There is an interesting, like 16 is not the same as like a 14 or a 12-year-old. You're more developed than that. I don't think that you can consent to, you can consent to an 18-year-old. I think that, again, as our society grows and understands mental health development, that we should understand that 16 is not old enough to be making decisions of an adult. Honestly, 18 might not be either. We have to figure a cutoff at. I just disagree with that. I don't think 16 is old enough. I just don't. I just think it's gross.
And start families as well. And you even said 13-year-olds, if expected in society to act like 23-year-olds, that's what you'll get.
Right.
So my question is that You, I would imagine, as you've made clear here, I think, are
Yeah, I think we should have a pretty flatline age of consent of 18. Here's the thing: like back in the day when people were only living till 30, and it's like, I kind of guess, I kind of get like why you'd be fine with a 13-year-old and like an 18-year-old. I still think it's disgusting, but I get it back then. But we have people living until like 80 years old, and so now like a middle-aged man isn't 20 anymore. A middle-aged man is 40, and so like I would think it's disgusting for a 40-year-old to be dating a 13-year-old. And if you look across any at least the monotheistic religions, there's no age of consent in the Bible or any of these texts, regardless of the text, other than when the girl's on her period. And I think it's really gross when you'll allow like an older man, like a 25, 30-year-old man, to marry a 13-year-old girl or a 12-year-old girl because she's on her period. It's disgusting, and it's just engaging in a grooming marriage. You're just having the kid engaging. They're being groomed at that point.
Against these types of medical interventions when it comes to transgenderism, trans ideology, however you would call it?
Yeah, this is a great question.
Why would you say that these types of people are of the age of, to sip beer, be full-fledged adults, at least should be in the eyes of the legal status, but also in quote what you said, I believe on Twitter, that these are children under 18 when referring to trans medical care and service? I
mean, this is an excellent question, and it exposes the entire ideology of Matt Walsh. We're going to see what he responds with, but the question is if you think that 16-year-olds are old enough to get married and start a family, if you think, and this is what Matt Walsh thinks, if you think that if a 13-year-old is treated like a 23-year-old and has the same responsibilities thrust upon them, that they will adapt to that, what you're saying by that logic is that 16 or even younger isn't too early for you to be transitioning. I disagree, but that's the logic Matt Walsh is operating with. And this question does expose him. I'll see what he says. The only argument he could say is we live in a time, the only argument that would be acceptable, that would prove that would keep him morally consistent, is to say, I believe we live in a society that causes our young people to grow up too slow, and since we don't thrust those responsibilities onto people, that it doesn't mature them fast enough. But even then, you would just argue that having some kind of a transitioning surgery would thrust upon the responsibility upon you and make you be ready for it. So, like, yeah, I think that he kind of gets dumpstered on this one.
Services.
Yeah, so much of what you've pulled there is from, I think that's from Media
Unless he just disagrees with what he used to say.
Matters hit piece about a year ago, pulling comments from 10 years before that.
Okay, so do you disagree with it?
And the point that I was making there is simply a historical point, that back through history, you find that people used to get married a lot younger. And so they didn't have this pregnancy was not sort of the crisis, no matter what age it happened.
Yeah, well, now we know with medically that like a 12-year-old getting pregnant could hurt them significantly. So
yeah, pregnancy was not often considered sort of the crisis that it is now.
And pregnancy also had much higher like mortality rates too. One of the reasons was doing it young, but we're also cleaner. But
because people got married younger, they started their journey into adulthood at a younger age. We don't live in that culture anymore. That used to be the culture that we lived in. And we also live in a culture now where we have this kind of extended adolescence that goes beyond the age of 18 and even up to 25 and beyond, where we treat even adults like they're essentially children.
Yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. But by this logic, you don't think that a minor is too young to transition. You just think that they don't have enough responsibility to be able to make that choice, right? So in his logic, in his perfect, well, not perfect world, but if we were maturing 16-year-olds, and your logic is a 16-year-old would be able to do whatever. My thing is that like if your age of consent in your state at 16, why can't a 16-year-old get top surgery? I don't think they should. I don't think people should be, but like my point is that stop advocating for that. If you're going to advocate, don't stop, but if you're going to advocate against, minors or like 16-year-olds getting top surgery, advocate against 16-year-olds being able to have sex with adults with your age of consent, right?
Which I've talked about as well. So we don't want to treat adults like they're children.
And again, he's not wrong about treating people. My thing is a lot of that, in my opinion, comes from the fact that it's hard to live by yourself now. It's hard to move out of your parents' home. The housing market is fucking crazy. It's expensive. Landlords are very exploitative. I don't think landlords fundamentally are necessarily a bad thing, but it seems like every year the landlord, it seems like these landlords realize like, oh my God, I have to raise rent. Why? Oh, I realized I just could. I just could do it. Oh, okay. That makes sense. You know what I mean? It's just fucking crazy.
But we also have to understand the psychological capacity of actual children, which is why performing a life-altering surgery on a child or giving them, for example, cross-sex hormones, which can happen at the age of 14 or younger, which sterilizes them.
It could sterilize them, sure.
What you're making life-altering.
I believe if you detransition, you will become re-sterilized. But okay.
Changes to their body, but they're sacrificing things about themselves that they can't possibly understand. Like they're making decisions that aren't really decisions because they're not old enough to make them.
But that, well, again, you think that they're old enough to make them. You just don't think that society matures them enough. If you think 13-year-olds can act like a 23-year-old, then obviously, you don't even believe what you're saying. But okay, I kind of get what he's saying. It's a little inconsistent, but it's fine. Again, when it comes to my decision or my feelings on people, minors transitioning, very clear. I go with what the data says and what the science says. You listen to the doctors, the parents, and the child themselves. The data, everything right now points to the way providing gender-affirming care to minors helps their mental health significantly. That's just the reality. A lot of times people will use dated statistics, like some Swedish study that was 20 years old that didn't study gender dysphoria, just studied gender identity disorder. That's just where I'm at. As time goes on and we get more long-term data, might that change? Absolutely. We might not be acting perfectly now, but as we get more data, we're acting more responsibly now than we would be if we did nothing. So, let's just be clear.
But they're making decisions for kind of the older version of themselves.
Okay.
So at the age of 14, I know I'm saying a lot more than you needed, but at the age of 14, the child is making the decision that I'm never going to have kids again in the future.
Well, that's not necessarily the decision. From my understanding, you can still detransition at that age, or not at that age, but when you get older and still be able to produce a kid. Right. I could be wrong. I don't know if we have a whole lot of long term on that. I know that other trans people who've gone through their puberty can detransition to an extent and then be able to be fertile again, have their kid and go back to transitioning. I'm not sure about a minor. I don't think that we have the long term negative impacts on that yet, just to be clear. But then it gets into a conversation of, like, is it worth it to potentially become infertile for the rest of your life if you have such a negative mental health outcome that you might take your own life? Or even if you don't take your own life, drastically struggle with existing in society, because that is a thing that people will have trouble with as well. So, it's like one of those things where your outcome overall is great, but you do have this negative of not being able to have a kid potentially, if that is. But it's like, is it worth it? And it might be. And it's hard for you as a young person to make an informed decision on that, but that's why you have doctors and you have parents that are helping you guide the way and, doing the best that they can do.
And yeah, at the age of 14, you might think that. When I was 14, I thought that. When I was 24, I thought I'd never have kids. When I was 26, I had 2. Now I have 6. So,
okay. Probably because he's gay.
Kids at that age are not equipped to make those kinds of decisions.
Okay, but my question...
But again, you think that kids at that age are equipped to make those decisions. You just don't think so in our society because you don't think that we put enough responsibility onto young people. So you don't actually think about... The question was about age. And you went on to say that it's okay for like a 14-year-old, I guess, to marry a grown man. And if they were treated as grown, they would adapt to that. But then when it comes to transitioning, you don't. So it's nothing to, in his opinion, it's nothing to do with age. I disagree with that. I think I've done a good job of explaining my perspective on the age and how, like, yes, if you give more responsibility to people, they will mature faster, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be as mature. I mean, if a 12-year-old is never going to act like a 22-year-old or 23-year-old. It seems like he's kind of not answering the question. He's answering a little bit, but not really. His answer would have to be, I would believe that they'd be able to do that if we lived in a society that gave young people more age or more responsibility. But that answer I still don't agree with. So
it was more of, you just now, you called them kids, but were these not your words, or do you change your opinion? Because what I'm confused about is, before you would say things along the lines of, these are like adults, or should be in the eyes of either culture or society, but now you're saying in this age range of 13 to 16 or 19, in that age range, they're now children. Because I would imagine that giving birth for female body people, females, is a life-altering decision. One possibly
Sure.
even greater, since you're bringing a new life into the world than just altering your own. So are these children? Are all these adults?
These are children. I mean,
Okay.
under the age of 18 are children, and
Interesting.
even though we have this problem of extended adolescence that goes way into adulthood, really your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until you're 25.
He's not answering the question. He's right about that. But now he's saying we have extended. This is not a good. He's not answering the question truly. He's being very careful. I think because he knows that I think it's because he knows that what he's saying is a little is getting put. I don't know. Because yes, they're children. We understand that they're teenagers is what we're really talking about, right? But saying, well, you don't develop prefrontal cortex. Like, okay, so then you don't think 16-year-olds are mature enough to have kids then? Well, but he would probably still agree with that. He has to disavow that. He's not disavowing the old points. There's a difference between acknowledging what happened in the past versus still supporting it. And my understanding is Matt still thinks it's okay for a 16-year-old to have a kid with an adult. It's like, okay, if you think that, that's what I mean. I disagree. I think it's wrong, but it's fine. But it sounds like he doesn't. He sounds like he does agree with that, but he won't say he doesn't agree. That's what it sounds like.
Okay. So even in specifically, marriages between these people and giving birth, you would say that's still child pregnancy, and those are children making that decision and giving birth.
Yes, I'm against child pregnancy, if that's your question.
Okay.
I think that he needed to push him better because he didn't push him the right way. He should have said, do you think it's okay for a 14-year-old to have a child if they're married? And it's like, okay, do you think a 16-year-old is okay? And then you would say, okay, if you think it's okay for a 16-year-old, why don't you think it's okay for a 16-year-old to transition? I would go in that direction. But interesting question. Answer was a little, it's okay. I feel like a little bit to be desired. But hey, what are you going to do?